G'day, Dave here, and we're looking at Matthew chapter 7 and verses 15 through to 23. In this passage, Jesus will give us some warnings. Now, I reckon warnings are pretty helpful. As a motorcyclist and loving kind of carving my way through country roads, it's very helpful when there are warnings on the corners. A corner coming up, a 35, a 25, a yellow arrow pointing me which way it's going to go and what speed I should take. Now, when I was young and irresponsible, I'd kind of double the number and feel that would be okay. But I now realise that it's there to keep me alive. It's not there to spoil my fun. It's not there to make life a misery. It's actually there for my sake and for the sake of any passengers I might be carrying or any other people on the road if I'm to venture one way or the other. You see, the warning is there for my sake. Same too when you go to a river up in the north of Australia and there's a sign there that says, warning, estuarine crocodiles, do not swim. In fact, do not even enter the water. What's it there for? Because it's hot and you just want to enter the water, and surely it's a warning. It's just meant to spoil your fun? No, it's to stop you becoming fodder for the crocodiles. If it's sharks on the beach, or if there's chemicals that you're not to touch, or if there's a great big wire fence protecting you from electrical wires that would electrocute you, they're not there to prevent you enjoying life. They're there to actually keep you alive. Now, Jesus gives warnings. He gives warnings because it's not enough to enter through the narrow gate. We must do that. It's not enough to continue on the narrow way. We must do that. But we need to not be led astray. We need to not take this tangent or go on that detour. And there'll be people who will want to take us from the narrow way to the wide way. There'll be people who want to take us away from the things of God to follow them instead. Have a look at what Jesus has to say. He speaks about false prophets. He says, watch out for them, for these false prophets, verse 15. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. So the thing about a false prophet is he doesn't come wearing a badge, I am a false prophet. He's not announcing the fact that he's about to deceive you. He will come and in every way present himself to be the real thing. But you need to be careful. Because just because someone looks good or says the right things or dresses the right way or is in the right building or has the right titles doesn't necessarily mean that they are teaching the truth. Look at what Jesus says. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them. You see, they're not going to announce that they are false teachers, but just have a look at their life. Have a look at the fruit of their decisions. Have a look at what they talk about and what they don't talk about. A number of years back, I looked at a book in a Christian bookshop. I think it was called The Power of I Am. And I was exploring this book because I expected it, having spoken about I Am, to talk about the greatness of God, that being his name. But it wasn't that at all. It was self-talk. The whole book was about if I say I am this, I am that, I will do this, I will do that. That self-talk, a kind of word-activated faith will bring these things about. Very sadly, it was a book that talked more about self-actualization than it did about God and barely mentioned the name Jesus. See, by their fruit you will know them. At the end of the day, friends, we need to be close enough to those who will teach us. We need to know enough about those who we might follow on podcasts, even this one. We need to understand that people, if they are teaching the truth, will back it up in their lives. And so ultimately, I take it that God wants us to be meeting together in churches, to have accountability and relationships with each other, where we can see whether a person's life backs up their teaching. Furthermore, Jesus goes on to say, verse 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. See, it's not even enough to say the right things. They're saying the right things, aren't they? Lord, Lord, that is who Jesus is. He goes on, many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles. And Jesus doesn't critique that they've done that. What does he say? Verse 23, then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. See, at the end of the day, it's not what we do, it's whether we know Jesus. No, it's not what we do, it's whether Jesus knows us. Whether we're in a right relationship with Jesus, whether we are doing the will of God the Father, whether we are entering via the narrow gate and following the narrow way. That is, if we are coming to Jesus to trust him in his death and his resurrection, if we are following as disciples of Jesus, having our lives shaped by Jesus' words. And that's what he goes on to say. Look at this next little story. He says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the wind blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. And the rain came down, and the streams rose, and the winds blew, and they beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. You see, if we want to stay the course, if to change the metaphor, if we want a house that will be strong in the face of a storm, if we want to not be destroyed, not be washed to the side, not led astray, not deceived by false prophets and false teachers, if we want to stay on track following Jesus, then we need to listen to his words and put them into practice. And you know, the interesting thing is, here is a case in point, because we've been listening to the words of Jesus. How are we going to respond to this now? Will we take Jesus' words seriously? It's very unpopular these days to speak about false prophets or false teachers. It's unpopular to criticize anyone or any idea. You're not allowed to speak against another religion or another denomination, another church or another preacher. But friends, we're called to be discerning, to recognize the truth by its fruit and by whether it's connected to Jesus. If you can read a book about the Christian faith and it never mentions Jesus, then put it in the incinerator. Don't recycle it. Well, you can recycle the paper, but don't let somebody else read the book. You don't want others to be led astray. Get rid of it. We need to stay focused upon Jesus, to put our trust in him, to follow him. That's what Jesus is calling us to do. That's what the Sermon on the Mount is about. It's about entering the kingdom of heaven through Jesus. It's about living in the kingdom of heaven by following Jesus. It's about being transformed to be more and more like Jesus. And then in these last two verses, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught them as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. It's interesting, when Jesus starts out this sermon, he's teaching his disciples. By the end of it, he's teaching a crowd, and they are amazed at his teaching. He teaches the word of his Father, and he teaches it in a way that no one does, because he is the gate. He is the way that we come to know God. He is the truth, and he is our life.